Hello, everyone, and welcome to week three of Business Management 325 Global Management. I'm sitting here in front of a public library in Ten Sleep, Wyoming, so trying to enjoy some of the benefits of having our fully online asynchronous class. So, a few things for this week. We will be starting global trade, which is, as I said in the introduction, sort of the nuts and bolts of global business and sort of where everything originated from. You could think of all business as being based essentially on trade in the beginning, and the international part being just sort of where politics kicks in and decides where borders are. So I think there's a few main things that we want to think about today is, of course, so we have two chapters. One is on the theory of international trade, which is something which I studied quite a bit at the University of Chicago under Jess Gaspar, who is a PhD student of Paul Krugman, who won a Nobel Prize for his theories on trade. So I think these theories are some of the best theories that exist in business. And without government intervention, the idea of free trade and absolute advantage and comparative advantage work very well. And governments realize this, so therefore they intervene with tariffs and quotas and non-trade barriers and all sorts of fun ways to sort of try to tweak the playing field in their advantage. Also, in terms of industrial development, which is what I write about mostly academically, is I write about the development of technological, um, industrial, and lifestyle clusters based around talent and skill sets. So that's another area that governments and businesses tend to get involved in. So we'll take a good dive in that. And two other things I think coming out of that that are interesting is going to be how is COVID going? COVID has obviously affected trade. Things like the unavailability of PE right at the beginning of this, people start to see how much supply chains were impacted, start to think about, okay, do we want to start slapping tariffs on something? The main thing about tariffs and trade is if I put a tariff on you, then you will definitely put a tariff on me. And it becomes a tit for tat, sort of like kids in the back of the car, which we were experiencing on our own road trip. You punch me and I pinch you, etc. And it escalates. So we'll see how things come out of this. Are people going to be level headed and try to get the economy back on course? Or are they going to take protectionist measures, which is particularly I think it's particularly concerning in the US because we have a presidential election coming up. So a lot of times politics are trumping economics, I think, in decision making. The other thing is we go back to sort of pre-COVID, there's still the trade dispute between the US and China. People are starting to rethink about phase two. Not that phase one was ever really phase one was sort of supposed to be concluded around January, but got really overshadowed by COVID. So there weren't a lot of really strong agreements. So I think we're going to see an uptick in the way that the world looks at US China trade and a lot of the related issues that are coming out of this. So as COVID slows down, expect the US China trade dispute to heat up a bit. I think that's my prediction. We'll probably even see that before the end of the summer. So a couple of other things. Congratulations to we highlighted Renee for her work on Tesla and their ability by leveraging their global supply chains to actually come out of this looking pretty good with their electric cars. To Cody, we're talking about the new ice regulations that are potentially going to affect hundreds of thousands of foreign students who may actually be forced to go back to their countries. As I'd said, again, it's a retaliation thing. If the U.S. does that to foreign students, then U.S. students are going to get kicked out of the respective countries. And I think this is really bad for global business. One of the things that I'm working on, I can tell you right now, we're working very closely with Senator Rich's office, who is the chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, to push through an act to provide training to U.S. diplomats in Taiwan to get a sense of sort of Asian language, Chinese culture, where Taiwan stands. So these are really important things. So as we push back on foreign students, diplomats, etc., because we've also pushed back on diplomats, particularly from People's Republic of China, then there's reciprocity. So that's something which I talked about. And then finally, with Dustin, who's talking about Hong Kong and the new security law, and as I'd mentioned in my post, Hong Kong is not only a vibrant economic center for the region, but it's also the sort of financial and IPO center. So a lot of companies who sort of rely on China for their markets, but Hong Kong for their financial and legal infrastructure, are very concerned. And this includes a lot of Chinese firms as well, particularly as many of them are facing pressure on Wall Street, on the NYSE, and on NASDAQ, and on other exchanges to be able to conform. Some companies have sort of pushed their listings back to Hong Kong, but as Hong Kong's their legal system starts to look more and more like Beijing's, this becomes a concern. And then finally, so for this week, I'd like everyone to get in groups. It looks like almost everyone has found a slot. If you haven't, we're happy to help out. Just put your name on one. Ideally, as I said, 6 groups of 5. I think we could probably make that work out. And we have so far we have groups looking at Huawei. Of course, Huawei is a Chinese company, so you want to look at issues Huawei is facing abroad. So, for example, a year ago, last November, or no, sorry, it was last November. Okay, mixing up my time. We had Joel Poppin, who's Micron's chief counsel. Micron is, sort of being the flagship company of the Treasure Valley. It's also very dependent on sort of China trade. A lot of almost 40+% of their revenues come from Chinese clients, including Huawei, who uses their semiconductors. So that's a big issue, and we had a big the U.S. China town hall, the Idaho section on this. So there's a lot of topics that are not simply China related. And also for NIO, another Chinese company, which I'm actually not so familiar with. It's a fairly new electric car startup. So I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with. And again, focus on how NIO can potentially build markets outside of the People's Republic of China. And there's a lot, you don't have to focus on the US. You can look at Southeast Asia, you can look at Europe, you can look at Australia, New Zealand, sort of Japan, whatever you like. So the idea is to pick a company and focus on what it's doing in a foreign market and the specific issues and challenges they face and how to solve them. So that's all we have for this week, and look forward to your work and enjoy the week.